Welcome everybody to the session. We're gonna jump right into it. You know, we're in the afternoon. After lunch for most of us, talking about security is a challenge on its own with a full belly. So let's do the best that we can to sort of follow along, and I'll try to keep this as entertaining as I can as well. So we're gonna be talking really about the idea of securing your keys to your castle, right? I call it the keys to the castle because, you know, when you have your keys, that's really what you're securing, right? You're securing your castle, your home, your assets, everything that is to you, right? And so to me, that's my castle, right? It's where my kids, my family lives. And so you have to secure that, right? And so we're going to be talking about really specifically wallet security, or really, you know, private public key security, and how to make sure that you maintain your security as you venture out in this space and explore. My name again is Shai Perednik. I'm the global segment and tech lead for Web3 blockchain at AWS. I am specifically aligned with our AWS partner organization. And so what that means is I specifically look out for our business strategy as well as our technical strategy for really accelerating our partners and overall accelerating this overall ecosystem. So that's really our goal, right? Is to hopefully answer this question about how do we accelerate the ecosystem and work with our partners, work with the whole decentralized space, and really continue to further this ecosystem as a whole. I've been at AWS for a little over 5 years, and I've had various roles from our professional services team to solution architecture to several other roles in between. And if you're curious to follow me on Twitter at ShaiSS. Just a quick disclaimer. Everything that I talk about today really is about educational and entertainment purposes. Nothing should be considered financial advice of any kind. If I do mention a token or a particular project or protocol, it is purely for entertainment or education purposes and should be considered coincidental. It's not a validation of any kind, nor should be treated as any kind of financial advice. I say very often DYOR, you probably hear this in the industry, you know, do your own research. I'm actually going to talk about what that means a little bit as well, right? So I'm not just going to tell you do your research and leave you hanging here, but we're going to talk about a lot about in this session about what really doing your research actually means and what you're doing when you're doing your research. So let's dig into that a little bit more as we go through this as well. And so we're going to start off with really talking about foundations, right? I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page here as we dig into the risks. And then we'll get into attack vectors and how to mitigate those attack vectors. And then we'll just talk about some general best practices that we see in the industry as a whole. And then finally, I'll try to leave some time at the end for Q&A, and I'll hang out the Slack channel as well. I apologize, you may hear my kids are on the background, so hopefully it's not too disturbing here. Just for a quick note, real quick, when we talk about Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, right, we're talking about this evolution of the web, so to speak, right? We evolved really from Web 1, which is really about reading and being able to read data, to Web 2, which was about reading and writing data. Right now we have Yahoo, we have Amazon reviews, we have Facebook and MySpace, and all these places that we can contribute data as well, right? So very much we went from a reading society in Web 1 to a creator society in Web 2. Now Web 3 is really bringing kind of that Web 1 ownership back, right? And that's really the key part in Web 3 is really about that ownership. So that content that we create, that content that I write, I now own that content, I own that data, right? And so what does it mean when we give a return ownership back to users of their data? So that's really what Web 3 is about, right? And that's what we spend a lot of time talking about when we talk about Web 3, we talk about blockchain, digital assets. Now, when we talk about blockchain, for the simplicity of this discussion, think about blockchain as really nothing more than a distributed network, right? And the distributed network is nothing more than a set of nodes, right? So when we talk about the concept of the word chain, right, if you will, like the inner gray circle there, that inner chain is really just a set of distributed nodes on a network that communicate and all talk to each other. We do have this concept of sidechain, right? We'll talk about layer 2s in a little bit, right? And those do exist, right? And we have sidechains, we have layer 2s, we have layer 1s as well. And ultimately, we need to be able to communicate across those chains, right? We need to be able to move assets between them. And we're going to talk about bridge exploits towards the end there. But we need bridges, right? Those are the key sort of infrastructure pieces that connect our chains together. And then ultimately, oracles, right? It's actually hard to get data in the blockchain world, and not just from a cost perspective, but computational perspective. And so when we think about oracles, think of them as a way that we get data in the blockchain world from the outside world. So an oracle very commonly is providing price data. We heard a couple of that in the previous sections, in the previous discussions. But an oracle can provide something as simple as a weather API or you know, a price of coffee in New York or something like that. So it really can be anything. And then we have smart contracts, right? And smart contracts are codifying that business logic into actual code, into mutable contracts that are sitting on our blockchain network. And we can execute those contracts and conduct something like a real estate transaction completely without having to rely on intermediaries, right? The intermediaries are code, and we can see what that code is because it's written or contributed as code into our blockchain ledger. Again, whatever blockchain we're using, just think of that as a smart contract as that code of law. So one of the key benefits that we have here now, right, is now that we have this, this our smart contracts on a blockchain network, and those smart contracts communicate with each other, and users can communicate with smart contracts. We get a lot of this peer-to-peer communication, right? And that's what empowers a lot of the things that we're excited about in the future, is this ability for smart contracts to talk to each other, and users to talk to each other, communicate to each other, and exchange data with each other. And so this is enabling a lot of the cool innovation that we see, and a lot of really the building blocks of building on top of each other we see really in the ecosystem. And the challenge that it brings up, however, is this concept of a smart contract cake, if you will. And I love cake. Cake is always really great, but when you have smart contracts that are laying on top of each other and they're all calling each other out, it can become a challenge, right? Where within that smart contract cake or stack, if you will, is the vulnerability, right? Where is that challenge or that security issue in that smart contract cake, right? Now, a 3-layer cake is nice, but very often we see in the industry that there's many more layers than just 3 layers, right? We see a lot of interweaving of protocols within each other. So this is a challenge, right? And we're gonna talk about how to mitigate some of these things as we go through the presentation. A couple more key things I want to talk about are on seed phrases, public keys, chain selection. We're going to talk about wallet types, airdrops. So let's start off with seed phrases. I hope that this is nobody's example. If it is, don't feel bad. I've heard this story many times, but a seed phrase is your key phrases, and very often it will be either 12, 24, sometimes 48, sometimes 25, but it's a key set of phrases that, when interpreted, makes out your private key. And also your public key as well, right? So you're going to use your seed phrase, you're going to generate your public key through those seed phrases. Those public keys are going to be your keys that you're going to share with people, right? That's how you let people know where to send you funds. So that seed phrase is going to get you a public key on a Bitcoin network, on Ethereum network, on the Litecoin network, Binance and Avalanche and Solana and everywhere else. And you might notice that that public key is slightly different, but that's intentional, right? That's the way that chain is interpreting via the algorithm that key and generating your seed phrase and generating the public key from that seed phrase. So the message of this is really that seed phrase is that key to the castle, right? If you lose that seed phrase, that's your keys, right? So let's just kind of summarize that again, right? When I have my keys, I generate a public key. In this case, Kaylin is the example here holding that public key. I'm Pat. I want to send Kaylin a message or assets, whatever it might be. I use Kaylin's public key. I encrypt the message. I send that on the blockchain network, right? However the network does its consensus, comes to an agreement on that transaction, the block gets submitted. Kaylin is the only one that can decrypt that message with Kaylin's private key. So once Kaylin decrypts that private key, now they can see that data. So one of the things we need to also think about, right, if we're talking about that key management, is do we custody or not, right? And you may want to custody your wallet, right? You might want to not to self-custody your wallet. So to self-custody wallet, or to have a self-custody wallet, means that I own my wallet, right? I own my keys. I hold my digital wallet. I own those assets, right? I have to keep it safe. I have to, worry about the passwords. I have to keep, maintain where I keep it. That's fine for me, right? I've been in this industry. I'm comfortable in this space. I've been here for a while. I understand how to, secure my keys. However, my mom, for example, that's where she's using a custodial wallet, right? Because she doesn't want to maintain that risk. She doesn't know how to maintain her keys. She doesn't want to either. She doesn't want to have to worry about how keeping it in a safe and getting out of the safe and how to use the hardware wallet or even a software wallet. She just wants a custodial party to worry about it. Ideally me, because I'm her son and she trusts me, but I don't want to be that custodial provider, right? So she's using a custodial provider to hold her keys for her. Now, one question I'll get very often when I talk about this is, if I have a seed phrase and I keep that seed phrase in a custody provider, or if I self-custody those keys, and now I self-custody and I hold the private keys, should I put those assets or that private key in a bank, right, in a private safe? And we're going to talk about in a second as we get to sort of securing your keys and stuff like that. So we'll get there in a moment. When we talk about wallets, right, one thing that's really important to remember is that we have hot and cold wallets, and we have things in between as well. So when we think about hot wallets are going to be our wallets that are constantly connected to the internet, right? They're constantly connected to our laptop. Generally they're going to be your software wallets. So they're going to be things like your MetaMask or Rabby or your Soulflare wallet. But they're always connected to the internet, right? They're always online. Then you have on the sort of opposite side of the spectrum, right? You have cold wallets, right? And these cold wallets are going to be wallets that are never online. If you've been in public sector, you've maybe worked in that industry before, you've heard the term air-gapped, right? We use this term very often when we talk about cold wallets because they are literally air-gapped. There is no internet connection with those devices with the internet. So those devices will often use a QR code, a USB connection of some sorts, maybe sometimes Bluetooth connection to connect back to the internet and connect ultimately to like a cell phone or something. So, depending on your, risk tolerance, your security profile, you may want a device that never connects to the internet at all, right? And you have to have your phone, you have to have the hardware device, they use a QR code to communicate. You might be okay with a Bluetooth connection. You might be okay with an occasional USB connection as well, right? That's when we start talking about warm wallets, when you have wallets that are sometimes connected to the internet. Now, the phrase cold wallets can also be used to refer to wallets that are stored somewhere else and kept somewhere in a safe. And that's also something that's really important to do, right? When you have your hot wallet, it's very often something you're holding in your wallet itself, and your cold wallet you're keeping somewhere that's very secure and you're very safe because you don't use it very often. The other really key term here is around airdrops. Now, we heard ICOs before throughout some of the other presentations, but the concept of airdrops is just the idea of, hey, I'm launching a protocol. I want some people to use my protocol. I'm going to go ahead and give out some free Shai coins for people to use my cool new protocol that I'm releasing. Now, Shai coins doesn't exist, but I want to give that to people, right? That's an airdrop. So generally that comes from good intentions, right? Protocols have good intentions for their airdrops. We're going to talk about some of those malicious intentions as we get to our mitigation stuff. So let's talk about risks, right? Clearly this, coffee spill is a big risk here, right? If we have our private key and we don't keep a private key safe, that is a risk. But when we think about risks, right, the challenge in this space is really all risks, all roads ultimately lead to a loss of funds. And that's really the challenge in this space, right? Is we're not just talking about, personal identity sometimes, or we're talking about information or transaction information. We're ultimately talking at the end of the day is really the loss of funds. And so that's why some of these things are such a concern. So we see things like attacks on the network. That's a big one that I've seen from a lot of people that I talk to. UI abandonment, right? The idea that somebody can deploy an application. Now, the contract lives on forever, but the actual interface layer that they produce, they might decide to abandon that. That happened earlier this year, where we saw a couple of developers that decided to abandon their UIs and ultimately kill their interface layer. Now, thankfully, the community stepped up and picked up those interfaces, and those applications continue to run. But that is a challenge, right? How do we tackle this? Then we have the challenge of centralized exchange solvency. We saw again a couple months ago and really throughout the earlier part of the year as we went to the bear market, this challenge of some centralized exchanges to actually stay solvent in a bear market. Then we have smart contracts as well, right? I talked about that smart contract cake and just the challenge of how do you have multiple protocols that call each other out, right? Where do you find that risk in that ultimate cake? And then finally, privacy, right? Depending on what side of the spectrum that you're at, you might say that blockchain technology offers you not enough privacy, right? You might say that it exposes too much information and you're worried about the tracing that you can do through the transactions and stuff like that, looking at the block explorer and stuff. Or you might say that it doesn't provide enough privacy and you want more privacy and you choose to use privacy preserving coins or blockchains and stuff like that. So again, depending on what side of the spectrum you're at, you may lean towards one side or the other. But again, ultimately, all these lead towards a loss of funds. So it's not all, fun and games, right? I love this space and I want to make sure that, we're not thinking that everything's doom and gloom here. It's just important that we really understand what's in that actual cake, right? When we go to eat something, we should understand what we're eating, just like when we're playing in this world, we should understand what's in that contract cake that we're eating. So let's try to understand some of those things. Let's dig into some attack vectors that are commonly seen in the industry. Let's talk about some mitigation steps as well. So some of these things, I kind of broke them up into about 5 categories. We have our traditional area, right? Which these are going to be the things that we've seen in the past. We see them in the Web 2 and Web 1 world, and back in the 90s even. And then we have the scams. We have our social engineering that we've seen before as well. And I'm going to talk about how those are slightly different in the Web 3 world, right? And how we have to sort of change our mind shift a little bit. And then we're going to talk about financial and network attacks as well. So let's look at that traditional one here. Very simple. We have the wrench attack. This is probably something you've heard. If you watch a lot of videos around security on YouTube, you've heard of something called the wrench attack. It's unfortunately what Batman and his family suffered. If you're a Batman fan, this is just means somebody gets physically attacked. Unfortunately, this is a very sad thing, but it does happen. It's not new in the cryptocurrency world, though. It's not new in the digital asset world, right? This has happened for years. Somebody getting mugged for their wallets. That's why I bring up that example of Batman, right? Where Batman's parents were mugged for their wallets, and therefore Batman's left as an orphan. So this happens. The way to mitigate this, just like with your wallet, right? Don't go in shady places. Don't carry your wallet in obvious places. Don't carry your crypto key in obvious places. I even question what is really the reason to carry your crypto key on you, right? If you have a software wallet, maybe you have that for temporary assets and stuff like that. That's okay. but you really should never be carrying any kind of key on you that has a ton of value, right? Think about your house key, right? Do you walk in a restaurant, just throw your house key on the table and walk away? No, right? You keep those house keys in your pocket, you keep them in your backpack, your purse, maybe. You keep it safe, right? Same thing with your private keys. Keep those private keys safe. Then we have the traditional man-in-the-middle attack, right? This is, again, very similar, something that's not new, right? But in the Web3 world, it's slightly different and takes on a different sort of connotation. Our man-in-the-middle attacks will often come in the sense of, trying to steal your keys or trying to rewrite the public address that you're trying to send funds to. So that's something that's seen very often, is somebody will use their laptop, right? They'll get some sort of malicious software on there. That malicious software will hijack the clipboard, and they may paste an address of their friend's Bitcoin address or Ethereum address, whatever it might be, and that clipboard hijacking tool in the background changes that address. That hijacking tool might also hijack the wallet and create a fake wallet. It may point your existing browser wallet at a fake malicious installation that's on your local machine as well to hijack your transactions. So there's a whole bunch of different man-in-the-middle type of attacks in this space, and really the simple way to avoid it is just don't use a laptop that you use for regular basis. Buy a very cheap laptop, something very simple that you can just use a browser on, and just use that for your digital asset stuff, your Web3 things on there. Even if you're just playing games, it's still your wallet, right? It's still your security. Only play games on that laptop. Maybe you might need to buy a better laptop, but still don't mix things together if you can. Also, just again, just take basic precaution, right? Don't randomly click on things, right? And so when we randomly click on things, this kind of leads us to talking about false chains, right? This is another thing that's seen very often in the industry, is this idea of you go to a website. We'll talk about clone websites in a second, but you'll go to a website or DApp, you'll log in with your wallet, and they'll say, hey, do you want to add this new network to your wallet, right? Generally, that's a good idea, right? It's making the user experience better. However, if it's a malicious site, right, they could have you, join some sort of who knows what network, and then they can have you send funds to that network over some sort of, who knows what other bridge, and therefore you lose your funds, right? You've moved your assets into this other network. They can do whatever they want on the network. Who knows what else is going to happen, right? We've seen this time and time and again, and it's very easy to fall for, right? I have an example here of Optimism and Ethereum as an example. Attackers will use ASCII characters to trick people, right? So it looks like an eye, but it's not really an eye. It's maybe another version of the eye or the other characters. It looks close to it, and you accidentally approve that. How do you mitigate this, right? There's great sites like Chainlist as an example, right, where you can go on Chainlist, you can go and log in with your wallet. You can then go ahead and attach the chain that you want to attach to your wallet, so you can use it. You can use wallets that already have some of those chains built into it. However, always do your due diligence, right? Even if you go through Chainlist, as much as I like the tool, do your due diligence. Make sure that you go to the documentation for that chain and double check, what is the chain ID? What's the Explorer ID? Make sure you know who you're connecting to. All right, let's talk about some scams, right? Rug pulls. Unfortunately, this is very common in the industry as well, right? This idea that a liquidity asset can be pulled out from underneath you. So again, I'll use the example of Shai coin that doesn't exist, but just for the sake of illustration, right? Maybe I have Shai coin and I pair that with USDC as a stable coin next to it. Well, as a developer, I go ahead and create Shai coin. I create the liquidity with USDC and I go out there and I put it in the market. People then go start trading that coin, and then I am a malicious attacker. I decide to pull all the liquidity. I pull all the USDC from that liquidity pool, and therefore tank the price of my Shai coin. Now, I don't care about Shai coin, and that's why I did that, right? So that's something called a rug pull, right? Where the developer is literally pulling the funds from underneath you. There's other variations of this, right? Where they may use something like called a proxy contract, where they may change the contract that you go to altogether, and then they completely pull out the project underneath, and all the assets are gone. But in short, that's what it is, right? Literally, somebody's pulling the carpet from underneath you, and the project and the funds are gone. Multi-level marketing scams, right? Nothing new, right? This is very common in the traditional, money world, and it continues to exist in the sort of blockchain, digital asset, cryptocurrency world. You have to do your due diligence, right? You have to look at a protocol, a project, look at its tokenomics, and decide for yourself: is that a Ponzi scheme? Is it a multi-level marketing scheme or not? Right? You have to be the judge of that. One day we'll get regulations. The regulations will hopefully help guide some of this and decide, help give ideas as to what is and what's not. But until that day, you have to do that homework, right? You have to understand, how is the token being bought or sold, right? How are people profiting off of this token as they trade it? I mentioned airdrops before, right? They're great to encourage activity, right? They're great to encourage people to interact with the protocol. However, unfortunately, they're also very often misused and abused by attackers as well, right? And so you look at a wallet, you look at your wallet, for example, and you might have an airdrop there for tokens that are the same name as maybe your favorite car, or maybe the same name as your favorite food or something, or your favorite basketball star or something, or music star, or a team. And you may be like, oh, what is this cool token, right? And they'll very often, these attackers are very clever, right? They'll name the tokens with some sort of URL in there, right? Or there's some indication of a URL, and you'll go searching for that URL, and you're like, oh man, I won this cool token, of this awesome, basketball team or something like that. I'm gonna go claim the tokens. And it says on that site, please enter your private key in order to claim your 1,000 tokens of, whatever team. Many people will fall for that, right? Because they'll see that as, hey, this is an opportunity to get this team, right? Nothing comes for free in this world. I was taught that very early on. Double check your homework, right? Does it make sense that that team would introduce a free token, right? Why would they do that, right? Would that singer or actor do that? Would the that foods company would they do that as well, right? Does it make sense for them to introduce that airdrop, right? Do your due diligence, do your homework, right? Use tools out there. There's great tools like Watchtower. Forta was a great one we just saw in the last presentation, and you have many other tools like Watchtower as well, to just scan the token, right? Get an understanding of, is that token a malicious token? Are there other contracts that are similar to that token that have been identified as malicious tokens in the past as well? So you got to do your homework there. You got to do due diligence. One of the easiest ways to tell that a site's malicious and you're potentially being led to a malicious sort of intention is look at the site, right? Does it look familiar, right? Does it look similar to other sites? Very often what we'll see in the AMM, right, the automated market maker, as well as the decentralized exchanges, is this cloning or the forking of sites. Now, Uniswap is one of the original ones. PancakeSwap did clone them. And then we have everybody else that cloned Uniswap and PancakeSwap after it. Now, not everybody's malicious, but there are a lot of malicious clones out there. And you don't know very often that you're actually using and interacting with a malicious site. So you have to use the site, right? You have to go on there, right? Do some research on the site, right? Check the URL, check the contracts that they're using as well. Do some research on their Telegram channel, on their Discord server as well. Try to understand where they're from. All right, let's get into some social engineering real quick. Again, not much different than traditional Web2 space, but what we're seeing particularly around social media is this idea that when you join a protocol or project, you might join their Discord server, the Telegram channel, you might get somebody messaging you, offering you free support and to help you out. Again, nothing comes for free. Be careful, because what will often happen is after that free support, they'll reach out and try to get you to give them give them your private key, maybe give them your wallet address or information, any other information that they might need. Right, it happens very often. And then on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and Twitter, we'll very often see the sort of impersonation of celebrities sometimes or influencers to gain people to send funds to that celebrity, that provider, or actually the attacker's fake wallet. So this happened with Steve Wozniak on YouTube, for example, where there was somebody pretending that they were running a Steve Wozniak Bitcoin donation campaign. It was completely fake. People sent Bitcoin to that, had nothing to do with Steve Wozniak, right? So you got to do the research, right? You got to ask yourself that question. Does this make sense, right? Would Steve Wozniak really host a YouTube stream on some random channel that's not actually his channel, offering a Bitcoin donation campaign? And if it is on his channel, where is this coming from? Because Steve Wozniak doesn't normally do this stuff, right? If you look at all his other videos, they're not related to Bitcoin donations. So why is there this thing out there, right? So again, approach that social media with that healthy dose of skepticism to understand, because ultimately what the attackers are trying to do is they're trying to phish you, right? They're trying to get information from you, and they may conduct spear phishing accounts through those airdrops. They may conduct phishing accounts, campaigns through email. They may conduct it through Telegram. They may conduct it through Instagram as an influencer. That's the goal here, right? It's phishing. It's trying to get that information, trying to get that private key. All right, let's dig into a financial attack before we get into some best practices here. So one of the things that we'll often see in a financial attack is this concept of the mempool and sandwiching attack. Now, this is a fairly advanced topic, so we're just going to talk about it in a very simplistic state, right? This is not necessarily a malicious intention, but it is an advantageous intention from the miner side, where they are trying to order transactions in a way that's advantageous to them. So this is often where you'll hear something called front running. You hear something a sandwich attack or a sandwich bot attack, where you might buy, I don't know, let's say $10 of BTC, and somebody before you comes in, and the miner in this case, right, is ordering that transactions in a way that their transaction comes before you, pushes the price of a BTC, right? Then you buy the BTC, and then right after they dump that BTC, therefore lowering the price, right? So you've already come into it paying more than what you expected, and the price is already less than what you expected when you come out of that trade. So in the end, you are the victim, so to speak, here, and the miner is the one that ends up benefiting from that very small difference there. This happens very often, and it's something that's very exciting to see, is that there's a lot of partners in building this space. Now, kudos to Decentralized Finance for putting together this list, and there's a whole bunch of other ones out there that are basically putting in this concept of MEV protection, right? Miner extracted value protection, or bot protection, right? You'll hear it called sandwich bot protection. And the idea is that these tools are helping you conduct these exchanges or these trades without being that victim to that sandwich attack. Now, we'll talk about network attacks fairly quickly here. Just I want to make sure we touch on these, right? Bridge attacks. I think there's been almost $5 billion of bridge attacks this year. Unfortunately, this is an area that as an industry we need to get better at. But you need to make sure as a user, when you're using these bridges, you test them out. You understand what team they're part of. You understand the protocol. You understand the architecture, maybe, right? Are they using a centralized architecture for the bridge itself, or is the actual bridge decentralized? And if the bridge is decentralized, how many nodes does the bridge have, right? Can the bridge itself be gamed by a 51% attack, which we'll talk about in a moment, right? So you need to understand those things. You need to do that research. I always suggest to people, do lots of testing with very small dollar amounts, pizza type money, Happy Meal burger type money. Do some tests, test out the bridge, understand the process of what happens to your funds as it's moving throughout the bridge, because it is scary. Sometimes these bridges can take 15, 20 minutes before the assets move. Some of them take a couple of seconds, some of them take a few minutes. So just do testing and understand what's going on there. Now, that 51% attack, right? This is not something that you necessarily as a user can control, but you can be in control of, are you suscepting yourself, or are you putting yourself at risk to a 51% attack? Now, 51% attack is simply explained as an attack on a network, and basically the network is gamed, right? There is more nodes, and I manipulate the nodes in the network. I manipulate 51% of the nodes in the network to submit a transaction or do something that's beneficial to me as that malicious attacker. So, for example, right, we may have a small network, right, that's usually stood up. And again, this is more of a problem with either newer networks or networks with smaller nodes. So I'll give you an example here, right? We have a new network that stood up with 10 nodes. I'm a malicious attacker. Let's just say it's proof of work. I come in, or proof of stake, and I can procure 15 to 20 nodes, right? I have the funds, I have the means to do so. I procure, let's say, 20 nodes. Now I own 20 nodes. The rest of the network owns 10 nodes. I have control of the network, right? I have more than 50% of the network. Based on the consensus algorithm, I could game the network in theory. Now, again, depending on the network, depending on the consensus mechanism, you may get slashed, and some consensus protocols have mechanisms to try to prevent this. But it's important to understand that as a user, how many nodes are really part of your decentralized network, and how decentralized is that network? Now, that's up to you to decide. I can't give you a magic number to say that anything over this number is going to be decentralized, right? You have to decide, what does decentralization mean to you, right? How many nodes mean that decentralization? So let's wrap it up with some best practices here. I know I have about 2-3 minutes left. Your seed phrase, I mentioned before, don't spill coffee or tea on it. Put it on a metal, plate or something, use those little letter things on the top left corner there, engrave it, punch it, whatever you need to do. Metal, generally does not burn, generally does not melt, generally does not get wet or rust. Sorry, it can get wet, but it generally will not rust, and it can't get bent that easily. So it's a very safe way to keep it, right? Keep your seed phrase in a safe. Make sure you keep that thing as safe as you possibly can. Don't leave it on the table, right? Don't walk around with your seed phrase in your pocket. Put that seed phrase in a safe, right? I know that's not always possible, right? Not everybody has access to a safe. Find somewhere that's safe in your house and put it in that place. Now, if you don't have that place safe in your house, the question is, should I put it in a bank? Now, to that answer is going to be depends on your risk tolerance, because the whole point of self-custody is you're taking ownership of your keys. You're becoming that decentralized ownership. And by putting in a bank, you are kind of going backwards, right? You're taking that decentralized ownership, that self-custody, and you are now custodying it in a bank. Now, true, the bank does not know what you're doing with that keys. They don't know anything. It's in a safety deposit box, but you need to decide whether that's your tolerance or not, right? Are you okay with that centralized ownership of the bank? But still, please just put it on a metal plate or something. Do not put it on a piece of paper where you can spill your coffee. Next up is really about restore tests. I have many different hardware wallets just because I'm a gadget geek. I love playing around with hardware wallets, and I love doing restore tests, right? I take my hardware wallet and I will, every couple of months, I will do a restore test of that private key to a different hardware wallet. Now, if you're using different hardware wallet providers, there's a valid point that you're introducing the risk of retail manufacturing. So maybe you don't do different hardware wallet manufacturers, right? Maybe you use the same wallet manufacturer. That's okay as well, right? But do that restore test between the two different wallets and make sure that you can restore your key. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had somebody tell me, I restored my key and I have none of my assets there. And we'll look at the seed phrase and I'll ask them, sorry, I won't look because they're not going to show me. But I'll tell them, right, did you maybe fat finger a word? And we find out that they wrote step instead of stow, or start instead of stop, or something like that. So very simplistic. You can make a fat finger mistake, and so you need to make sure you test out your private keys and do those restore tests. Finally, I wanted to leave everybody with sort of what do we mean when we say DYOR, do your research, right? Inspect the contract. Use the tools I talked about before. Check for a honeypot. Check if you can mint that contract. Check if the ownership is renounced, right? Does the developer still own that contract? Did they upload the raw code of that contract as well, right? Or did they choose not to, and you just have the binary there? Finally, does the holders versus the active users make sense, right? If a protocol on Telegram has 50,000 users and there's only 3,000 holders, there's something wrong there. And also vice versa, right? If there's only 1,000 users and somehow there's 50,000 holders on the Explorer, what's going on there, right? Is that an airdrop? So look at that holders versus the active users, really important, right? And then ultimately decide how doxxed do you want the team, right? Are you okay with the team being completely anonymous, or do you want them to be completely exposed? Keep it simple. Use block explorers to help you explore there, and use portfolio tracking tools to help you understand ultimately what's going on in your portfolio. And with that, I'll wrap up and we'll open up for Q&A.